Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Smith, and I am the founder of Fulcrum Politics, a North Carolina-based organization focused on boosting third political parties. And today with me, I have Jackie Fox of Jackie Fox and Friends, and Ian Freeze, both of who are going to be describing some recent articles that they wrote for Fulcrum Politics about the Minneapolis protests. We're also going to be discussing marijuana policy, and we'll also be discussing where they each fall on the spectrum of libertarianism and how libertarianism in general is much more diverse than just the Libertarian Party. But all you viewers at home, we have two great guests. They both wrote articles for Fulcrum Politics about the Minneapolis protests, from Jackie writing more so from the left, Ian writing more so from the right. They'll both be part of an ongoing series that Fulcrum Politics is trying to pursue, where we try and address topics of the day. We have about 12 topics lined up as of now, where we address topics of the day from a left perspective or a right perspective, or other perspectives besides that, just trying to provide a balanced perspective, which is what we're calling the series. You'll learn more about both Jackie and Ian as today's interview goes on, and I hope that their story resonates with many of you viewers out there, kind of showing that all of you guys have a home with a different third party. There's a third party out there for you, I promise. And that's what part of what tonight is going to be, is sharing our stories so that all of us can find that political home we're looking for. All right, because I guess you can consider us real estate agents. We're going to help you find your political home one way or another.
And a lot of America is politically homeless right now, and that is a real crisis that we need to address.
Yes. I believe there's polling done on a regular basis where roughly a quarter of America identifies with the Republican Party, truly. Roughly a quarter of America identifies with the Democratic Party, truly. And the other half of voting age adults are all lost. Lost is a harsh word, but they're looking, they're searching, they're trying to find that political home that really makes them proud to be an American. So hopefully that's what Fulcrum Politics ends up doing for residents of North Carolina, kind of exposing people to the 18 different third parties that are all vying for your vote and your support. So with that, let's get into tonight's main topic. The main thing that we're talking about tonight, both Ian and Jackie kind of provided a perspective on the Minneapolis protests. Jackie speaking more from the left, Ian speaking more from the right, and kind of just comparing and contrasting responses to that event. Jackie, if you would like to start talking about your article.
So I hope all of you have read the article. If you haven't, go do that, because I'm not so much going to rehash the articles. I'm going to expand on a couple of points. The first one is understanding why people are protesting right now is very simple. As I've seen a lot of people sharing various Martin Luther King quotes, and I think that the most appropriate, right? I think that the most appropriate is that Martin Luther King, my favorite political hero since I was like 5 years old, true story. My favorite Martin Luther King quote for this particular occasion is that violence is the language of the unheard. And we could find no better example of us not being heard than the man that is Derek Chauvin. He has, over the last 16 years, he has had 12 police brutality complaints, none of which resulted in any disciplining. Even before George Floyd, he had killed or shot 6 people in the line of duty. And the worst, I actually remember this incident. The whole country got upset for like a week about this. There was an unarmed Hispanic man was shot 16 times out of 42 bullets fired by 3 police officers. And those 3 police officers got paid vacations for it. And we were very upset about that at the time. I was on a Fox News YouTube video about the sentence, or about the charges that are being levied against these men. And I had to drop a comment in the comments section that said, it's a shame that we had to go through all of this to finally get justice. And someone replied, well, you really rushed to all this protesting and rioting, didn't you? And no, we didn't. We have been waiting for this man to be convicted of his crimes for 16 years at least. And I think that is far, far long enough. The reasons why we have these issues, for one, and this was noted both on two of my favorite YouTube channels, um, Cody Johnson of Some More News and Hassan Minaj of the Patriot Act, both noted that in Minneapolis, they had a system called warrior training that was banned by the mayor. Now, this type of training teaches police officers to see threats everywhere, to be constantly fearful of their life, and to shoot first so that they don't die. And obviously, that is a terrible strategy if you want to avoid extrajudicial murder. But after it was banned, the police union decided to offer it for free to all of the officers in Minneapolis. And we have a pretty serious problem with police unions. From the left, I love unions. So it really pains me to say that we have a serious problem with police unions, because while I do agree that we need unions to give workers more strength to advocate for themselves and to protect themselves in the workplace, when you're literally protecting yourself and your workplace is the law, you are protecting yourself from the law. You're creating a multi-tiered justice system where police are not held accountable in the same way that everyday people are. And we see that not only in Minneapolis, but all over the country. Now, how do we fix this? Well, one thing that we don't do is what we did in the 1990s with the crime bill or in the 1980s with the war on drugs. Neither of those things worked. Crime has been going down. Violent crime especially has been going down since even before those things were put into action. It's been a fairly long trend. And there's a completely separate reason for that I might get into later. But what I want to say, the thing that isn't going down is recidivism. People are more often repeat offenders. If they were scared of the punishments that the system was handing out, they wouldn't repeat the crimes that they commit. There is a more systemic issue, this suggests, and we need to address that systemic issue. And I think that one of those issues is the economic situations that people are in. People don't get so desperate that they turn to a life of crime for no reason. They do it because their situations are not great. And I think that one way that we can improve that is with the basic income guarantee that creates kind of a floor where everyone in America gets at least, say, $1,000 a month. The reason that I prefer this to something like a universal basic income is, while I believe in modern monetary theory, while I don't believe that government spending is directly correlated to inflation, I do believe that a universal basic income would create inflation in basic needs, because I can just imagine the dollar signs in a landlord's eyes when they hear that every one of their tenants will be getting an extra $1,000 a month for the rest of their lives. I mean, that just sounds like incentive to raise rent prices $500 a month, like immediately. That sounds like a good reason for grocery stores and food producers to raise the prices of food immediately. But when you're not increasing the median, you're creating a floor at the bottom that no one can sink under. I mean, an idea like that could end homelessness. Imagine all the crimes that are caused both because people are homeless, which is a crime in a lot of places. And, if you're homeless, you probably have difficulty getting a job. If you have a difficulty getting a job, you have difficulty getting money, which means you have difficulty getting food, which means you might steal for food or do shady things for food. Going back to an earlier point that I was making, I think that poverty has a lot to do with crime itself. So I think that if we do a lot to eliminate poverty, we do a lot to eliminate crime. And if we eliminate crime, we eliminate the reasons why police have to interact with civilians to begin with, and that goes a long way to solving our problem. Though, in our next article that's coming out on Friday, I will be talking about what I would do as a police chief, so will Ian. And I'm going to get deeper into some of the things that I think that we should be doing at the local level to be solving problems like this, in addition to the things that I just laid out.
So to all our viewers at home, just like Jackie just said, we have another balanced perspective articles, or another balanced perspective article coming out this Friday, June 5th. But we're both of our commentators here will be talking about what they would do as a police chief, kind of a natural extension of how to solve the issues lying underneath this Minneapolis protest that we're currently, or protests across the nation, the world at this point that we're experiencing. Last thought I would say for Jackie is, if any of those ideas that Jackie talked about resonated with you, make sure you reach out to him at his YouTube channel, which will be included in the description for this video and everything else. We're trying to form a network here, and as if, like I said, if Jackie's ideas resonate with you, feel free to reach out to him. We're always looking for more
There's
people like him.
there's plenty more of them. Where that
Yes.
came from.
Yes. So with that, thank you, Jackie. Ian, if you would like to talk about your article as well.
Yes, quite simply, I think that a lot of this could have been avoided if there had been a third party long before now to shake things up, if there hadn't been people that were confident in their own authority and in their political position and knew that there were activist political groups that were trying to go in public office that weren't so much political groups but activist groups, then they might not feel so comfortable in their authority that they might be motivated to see their actions in a new light and know that they can't continue business as usual without facing some sort of harsh repercussion at the polls. And I also, in my article, if I may pull it up here for a brief moment, said that the main problem is the mainstream media has made it sound like this is the best possible situation and that the two-party system is the best one out there. And this is a false narrative created by the people with a vested interest as the system currently exists. So thankfully, and I think that the social media is not going to let this happen for very much longer because we can each be our own news reporter in the age of TikTok, Instagram, Zoom, and things like the Discord app, and of course, Facebook and Twitter. So Jesus talked about the birds of the air, and now we tweet things. So that's my position. Also, the main thing I see is that if we had, some of these cities have had the same political party be in charge of them for so long that they basically built Tammany Hall style political machines, and everybody there is beholden to them. And if the police chief plays nice and makes good and does I scratch your back things for the political bosses of that city, their officers can do whatever the hell they want. Now, if there are more third parties and there had to be more coalitions, a coalition is much harder to pull together if people are misbehaving. Because then the whole coalition looks bad. The coalition might push somebody out into the rain so they can suffer the consequences of their action. So also, it's kind of boils down to basic economics in the sense that if there's no competition, there's no incentive to be better. So the third party system would be the kick in the ass that the political economics need to get the system to run right, get and provide better service to the people who are electing them, who essentially, if we picture elections as buying stock in a political party, and we're only given two shitty options, but a third new awesome company. We're stuck choosing between IBM and Dell for a iPad, but then a third party like Apple shows up when we get what we want. They're scared of that. So that is my position. On the point that my friend, Mr. Fox made, universal basic income to me seems like a poor idea from the standpoint that I do not think that everybody is entitled to anything. I'm not entitled to anything. You're not entitled to anything. Nobody is entitled to anything except that for which they work for. Now, if somebody is mentally disabled or elderly or is physically incapacitated, that is one thing, but nobody should just get $1,000 a month by merit of having a pulse. But that's just me. But I do think that we need to have something done about healthcare. I think that healthcare system would be a much better option than the universal thing, because a lot of these people who are homeless not because of anything they have done, it's because their health failed and the healthcare system made it so they couldn't work. So if we fix healthcare, we wouldn't need universal basic income. We wouldn't need universal basic income if people were healthy and were able to work and were able to get out there and do jobs, and universal basic income would not even be a necessity because, quite frankly, if we were just to deal with the health of a society, then we wouldn't have to worry about the wealth of a society because everybody would be able to work and contribute because we would have people that were in physically and mentally in good health. Finally, I distinguish between protesters and riots because a protest to me is Edmund Pettus Bridge or Birmingham, Alabama. What they're doing is more like a free-for-all. There is no minister or ministers locking arms, leading people with signs to City Hall and standing there quietly and waiting for somebody to come out to redress grievances. There's a big difference between destroying your own neighborhood and burning down buildings of people who did nothing wrong. If I owned a business, like, for example, there is a business in my county next door to me where a gentleman opened a restaurant that exclusively employs homeless people, and back of house and front of house in his 5-star restaurant. He pulls people off the street and gives them jobs. The rioters destroyed windows on his business. How's that for gratitude? So I do think that there's a difference between a riot and a protest in every possible way. Now, if they were protesting, then I'd be fine with that. I'd be out there with them right now, but I'm not going to be party to a riot. And if they're going to riot, then that's a problem. George Floyd's own family, his brother has gone out there and said, cut it the hell out. His own brother has said, we are a good, God-fearing Christian family. This is not what my brother would have wanted. Cut it out. And it's worth noting that George Floyd had, from what I understand, turned his life around and become involved in Christian ministry, helping people keep from doing the mistakes he had made. So I don't think he would have wanted this either. So they are, in fact, actually dishonoring Mr. Floyd's memory and dishonoring the wishes of his family by continuing this nonsense.
Can I rebut part of that?
Before we do that, I'm going to do the transition again like I did for you real quick,
Sure.
real quick. So thank you, Ian. For all of you viewers out there that really identify and resonate with what Ian was talking about, make sure you go read his article and get to know him. Go reach out to him in the Fulcrum Politics members Facebook group, as well as the North Carolina Third Party Supporters Facebook group. Both are places you're going to be able to find Ian and reach out to him and have a conversation about his views and where your views may overlap. So for both of our content creators here, Jackie and Ian, you're going to be able to find them both either at their own respective channels or in the Facebook groups affiliated with Fulcrum Politics. So
absolutely.
Now that you guys have both introduced your topic, let's start comparing and contrasting both of your views. Go ahead.
So I have a couple of issues with the way that you frame the protests. They are predominantly peaceful. Like, they are happening in all 50 states. I
Agreed.
have a lot of friends, not only in my state, not only in this state, but like all over the country. They're streaming these on Facebook Live, and I'm seeing how peaceful they are. That being said, there is a lot of property destruction that's happening, but we're also seeing. I saw video of this today for the first time, answering a question of who's dropping off the pallets of bricks. In at least one case, it was the police. Ask yourself why the police are doing that. But I do understand why while we do have a lot of bad actors, even including white nationalist groups, alt-right groups that want to turn this into a civil war, that want to make this more violent than it should be in order to discredit the movement, all sorts of reasons that people might do this. Even in spite of that, I can understand why people, even acting in good faith, would want to do these things right now, because we had protests when that unarmed Hispanic man died. They were localized more in Minnesota at that time, but there were protests there when that happened, and they got paid vacation. We now have all 4 officers involved looking at a situation where they could each get 40 years behind bars. This wasn't the initial pitch. Like when the protests started, they wanted third-degree murder and no charges for the other 3 officers. It took days of this for them to change and decide that second-degree murder and accusing the other 3 of being accomplices was the way to go. And that is far more closer to justice. It's a shame that we had to do this to get there, but I don't think that a simple protest would have worked. Also, speaking on Birmingham, there were a lot of riots during the 1960s civil rights movement. My father was in the National Guard and had to respond to those locally, even here in North Carolina. That did happen there too.
But Martin Luther King Jr. didn't agree with that at all. He was not a proponent of that.
Right, and there's a lot of people who don't agree with it now. And having been a part of North Carolina activist movements, I also would want to push back on the fact that there aren't pastors out there. There absolutely are. I mean, one of the most famous activist pastors in this country at this time, Reverend Barber, is a North Carolina resident who has been very active. I don't know if he's been involved in this. I can't imagine that he wouldn't be. Maybe he's too busy running the poor people's campaign right now. But I would imagine that he's out there, and I would imagine that there are many other reverends out there as well, in keeping of the tradition of Martin Luther King. I mean, we're a state that had Moral Monday protests that were primarily driven by the religious community. So I don't think that that's entirely true. I mean, I feel like a lot of cases could be made when you have protests happening in 50 states, depending on which evidence you're willing to look at.
Absolutely.
And any thoughts on that, Ian, I guess?
Yeah.
I agree with most of what you are saying, but I do not like seeing innocent people have their property destroyed in any way, shape, or form. So if they were going after anybody, then I would suggest they go after the people responsible, not go after indiscriminate targets.
Yes.
I'd suggest precision targeting, not a shotgun blast.
Yes, and you know, a lot of these people, a lot of what I have heard, a lot of what I initially heard out of Minneapolis was that a lot of these people were like lining up in front of small community businesses, especially minority-owned businesses, and trying to protect them from the elements that were trying to do this. I mean, we've probably seen that. Again, it's hard to have eyes on all 50 states. This has been like 4 days. There's not enough time for me to sit and watch all the video footage and tell you what's happening all over the country right now. But I would imagine that that's happening all over the place.
I imagine a year from now, we're going to have a very nice documentary kind of going through a bunch of the footage from the last week. At least I hope that someone ends up working on a documentary like that, kind of trying to catalog and log everything that happened over the last few days across not just the 50 states, but the whole world. I would watch that documentary in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
It kind of reminds me, I know Nick's aware of this, but all the protest, I don't know if I'd even call them protests. The rioting that happened, sure, that's probably better. The demonstrations and rioting that happened in Wilmington, what was that, like the 1910s, 1920s, when they, I mean, you had community members that were standing outside of Black-owned businesses trying to keep these white supremacist Democrats, ironically, at that time, from burning their buildings down and destroying their buildings. And unfortunately, the police were not on their side. And once again, we saw the police shooting into this. But there are a lot of groups that are antagonizing this, unfortunately. Yes. I've seen a lot of peaceful, I've been on live streams watching peaceful protests that were fired into by the police, that were tear gassed by the police. And I don't know what your principles on violence are. I consider myself to be a pacifist. But I can
consider, if I can respond to that real quick, if you don't mind, is that okay? I subscribe to the non-aggression principle of libertarianism, where if you do not have permission to start a fight, but by all means finish it.
Well,
so I don't have a problem with putting up a fight if somebody comes into my house and comes near my sister or my mother or my father, but I'm not going to go out there and start taking a brick bat and smashing shit just because I had one too many. But if somebody comes into my house and starts messing with my family, then they're going out toes up, feet first every single time, because that is my family and no one touches my family and actually gets to live after that.
And both of you
Yeah,
guys are talking about a whole bunch of very, there's been a lot of humanity that's come out watching all these protests. Yeah, and I think through these protests, we've seen people defending themselves like you're talking about, but also extending an arm of compassion like Jackie's been talking
Agreed.
about. We've seen so many different shades of humanity through all these protests. We see police officers getting assaulted. We also see police officers getting defended by protesters.
Mhm.
It's the whole range of human emotions are being run right now through these
Police
protests.
officers walking arm in arm with the protesters
Yes,
as well,
exactly.
which has been really amazing. And I can't think of a better way to heal your community in this specific, like, that's what the community needs to heal. There's no way to answer a protest about police brutality with more police brutality. That just creates a feedback loop that is not going to end. It's not going to end without a lot of death, unfortunately. I don't want that to happen.
Well, with that very somber realization about some of the ills facing America, I think we might need to light up a little bit and start talking about marijuana policy a little bit, all right, as a way to kind of forget our ills for this evening. The next topic we're going to be talking about, first, before we leave, as a reminder, if any of the things that Jackie or Ian talked about really resonate with you, feel free to reach out to them on any of their multiple platforms, whether it's on Facebook and Fulcrum Politics groups, or on their individual personal channels. But like I said, let's light up a little bit and talk about marijuana policy for a little bit, all right? That's going to be the third segment we'll be talking about today, is marijuana policy and how our two commenters kind of approach marijuana policy. Kind of bringing it back to third parties, which I think some of you guys that are very interested in marijuana might be interested in. One of the 18 political parties currently trying to become official and successful is the Legal Marijuana Now Party. That is an official party trying to become recognized by the state of North Carolina. They really focus on legalizing marijuana, the concepts of democratic socialism, environmental stewardship. They're very pro-labor and anti-war as well. So if those kinds of policies really resonate with you, I definitely recommend checking out the Legal Marijuana Now Party. But with that, let's go back to our commentators. Let's do a quick introduction on both of y'all's opinions on marijuana policy. Let's start with Jackie again.
So when I originally proposed this topic to you, Ian, I thought that we were going to agree on it a lot. And I'm not actually sure once I thought about it, because I'm actually not in favor of marijuana legalization per se. And I'm actually here after hearing the values of that platform, I'm curious why they are too. I would much prefer, and maybe you will agree with me on this, to have marijuana decriminalization, to have all of the laws against it removed, but not a system of legalization put in place. And the reason that I say that is because a system of legalization tends to, I mean, in a lot of the states that we've seen legalized, they have made kind of a permitting system or a licensing system. And then there's only so many licenses to go around in that state. And then they have bidding wars for them. And then only the biggest and already well-to-do companies are able to get into that market to begin with. It doesn't encourage small business growth, as I think a lot of people who supported the legalization effort had kind of hoped that it would. And it's something that is really being gamed by the people who are already doing well in the system to make them even more money. I would rather that everyone just be able to grow their own pot plant in their backyard. I mean, you know, that's the ultimate joy of gardening right there. I mean, I long for the day where I don't have air fresheners in my house. I just have colas hanging from the ceiling that are giving that fresh fragrant scent all throughout my house. And I never have to worry about buying from a legalized cartel or buying from an illegal cartel that benefits from the war on drugs. At least, even if it isn't like buying from someone who's buying from someone who's buying from someone who's buying from someone who's buying from the cartel, that's still unfortunately supporting the cartel just so I can be a little bit happier about the situation that our country finds itself in.
Excellent points, Jackie. How about you, Ian?
Well, my simple belief is that I think that it should be legalized and controlled, much like the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. And at the very least, it should be at least be used as a cancer control drug, and possibly something that could be used for mental disorders, PTSD, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, etc. And I'm very interested in what it can do for cancer patients as well. So that is my primary concern.
So
Multiple
if I
sclerosis as well. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but my mother has that, and they've shown a lot of really good study on that, especially coming out of Canada, in how it treats that.
Cirrhosis of the liver, you say?
Multiple sclerosis. It's a nerve disorder where the
Yeah, I'm
myelin
sorry.
sheath of your nerve just kind of rots away over time.
Yeah, because cirrhosis of the liver can be caused by things other than alcoholism. So I
This is
wasn't sure
true.
what you're talking about. I wasn't trying to insinuate anything.
Well, hey, it would reduce our nation's dependence on alcohol to have a good time too. That would be nice.
No one ever died from ODing on marijuana, but you sure as all get out die from getting drunk too much.
Yep.
So,
So my other point,
real quick, if I do understand both of your positions, I'm going to try and restate them, I guess, is Jackie, decriminalization, but not legalization, so that the government doesn't control the supply. Meanwhile, Ian is much more focused on kind of mimicking the government monopoly that kind of like the ABC stores have on alcohol, so that
that is just the first phase. The first phase is that. Second phase is we phase out the ABC model entirely and let people run it like they do tobacco shops now.
Gotcha. So
Still,
ABC is like a transition stage from.
Yes, absolutely. I would want I'd want there to be a transition, so there would be a smooth way where you would start the stores. The government would start and run the stores, but slowly but surely the government would sell them to private owners, preferably people who are young, just starting out, that want to have a small business of their own to foster small business growth as a way to help people get on their feet. And then the other thing I would say is that I would be in favor of going after the violent drug dealers who sell marijuana very, very, very aggressively and very, very, very harshly. And there are some marijuana addicts who are not mellow and calm, but are actually, in fact, violent. Trust me on this, because I have had a member of my church deal with their child who got addicted to marijuana and became very aggressive and very violent. It was a very odd reaction, but that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And for me, if we were to divert funds and punish people who actually were drug pushers and not punish people who got in over their heads, and then maybe use the sales tax off of the legal sale marijuana to help rehabilitate these people, then it would be the definition of a win-win for everybody.
Interesting ideas. I like it, Ian. I like the idea of the ABC stores as a transition, and also using it as a way to boost small businesses. Because, like Jackie was talking about, with places that have legalized it, it becomes a big business if you start limiting supply. So I like the ideas that both of you guys are talking about. Anything else to add, Jackie?
Yeah.
Let's keep
wow.
going.
Man, I had one thought directly off of yours, but it escapes me right now. Oh, well, I do want to make the point that having a violent reaction to marijuana is pretty rare. It's a lot more likely that you have either, like, the negative reactions much more commonly are like extreme paranoia, which can rarely turn violent, or
that's exactly what happened.
Fear that your heart's going to explode or something, which is really just putting you at a danger for like a hospital bill, because it's not actually going to explode. You just kind of think it is.
It was extreme paranoia and
reality.
It was extreme paranoia and violent outbursts to the point where he had to wrestle and pin his son to the ground to protect his wife.
That is scary.
It's always how the neurodiversity of the country.
So basically, I would want to go after the person who sold him that stuff more so than him himself. Then I would want to make it so that, for starters, marijuana would be something that you would have to get a license to purchase from a doctor. And then after you get a prescription from the doctor, you can buy as much as you want to prevent that exact thing from happening.
Well, if you could do that, what stops there being a secondary black market that's just kind of coming in through that? I
Well,
mean,
at
what's
least,
stopping me from getting a prescription and then selling to my whole block, essentially?
okay, and I will admit that that is a problem, but at least if we do that, we can't say we didn't try something to prevent something from happening. At least then we won't be guilty of not trying.
Yeah.
At least then,
I agree with you, Ian. There's a lot of benefits to opening it up because you talked about.
I want to at least be able to tell my children that when I do something like that, that where I made marijuana legal to acquire, I took all the steps I could, but I still had to trust people to make the right decisions. And at the end of the day, most of them did, so I could stand by my decision and answer to God for that when I die, that I didn't do anything that I thought was terribly wrong. So I think that if I do everything I can do right, I am not responsible for the actions of what somebody else does. So your point, I agree with, but that's really not my fault. I did all the things I could do right, but somebody is always going to slip through the cracks. There's no amount of government control that's going to stop every violent act out there.
I had two other things that I thought of while you were speaking. You made me realize that when I say that I want marijuana decriminalized, that's basically for the flower product. There are other marijuana derivatives that I would want to see in a more controlled nature, and I think that an ABC store style distribution would probably be the best, with that money coming back into the community. Maybe even like directly supporting like drug treatment programs for people who couldn't afford them otherwise. I mean, that can often be the reason that people don't get off drugs. It's simply cheaper for them to stay on drugs and not deal with that than it is for them to go into rehab. But things like, we've seen fairly recently, I think it ended up being tied back to some sort of a vitamin C derivative that was in the cartridges that were coming out of the cartels for a while, was causing this terrible lung reaction with people in the concentrates. And those are great if they're done right. Those are incredibly medically beneficial. But I don't necessarily trust just anyone to make them, because you can very easily concentrate just a small chemical that was in your fertilizer or in some sort of an additive, and get to a point where you have something that's dangerous like that. So when you're concentrating it, that is something I would want a little bit more control over. But as far as the plant, the flowering product, I would prefer that there be no laws on how that is done, so that everyone can do it for themselves as best as possible. Because you
that sounds
really,
like something for the Food and Drug Administration to handle.
You get the most control over what goes in your product when you do it yourself. Just like, if you have a very specific diet, the best way is not shopping around to try to find who fits your diet in terms of restaurants, or it's to make it yourself from scratch. The second thing that I would like to say, the thing that brings violence into drug dealing is the criminalization of the industry. Because, you got to think about it. Like, first of all, from knowing people who got into selling weed specifically, and knowing why they ended up arming themselves in some cases, they got into it first because they were early 20 something. They'd been working for a couple of years. They'd had terrible jobs. They'd been scrubbing toilets. They'd been abused by retail customers. They made minimum wage, and then they sold weed for like 3 days, and they made more money than they made in the previous month. And they said, I'm never going back to that job again. I can do this from my couch by answering text messages. No, thank you. And first of all, our country, our economy needs to provide a better standard than that, so that so that it's not so much easier and more tempting to just sell bud from your couch, first of all. But the other problem is, if you are selling a large amount of marijuana and other people know it, what's stopping someone from robbing you? I mean, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to call the cops and say somebody came and stole my weed? How? You have no legal recourse. As long as they have more firepower than you, there's nothing stopping them from doing it. And that's, I mean, I had a friend held at gunpoint in his own home with, you know, his significant other there, and it was not a good situation. He went out and bought a weapon after that. And that's what brings the violence into selling weed. If it were decriminalized, you would not see very much of that. Now, again, you can't remove all violence from society. There's going to be some crazy people doing even the sanest and legalist of things.
Everything
But
you're
that's
saying
going to
is
remove
why
a
I
lot
want
of
it
it.
legalized. Everything you just said is if we remove the criminal element by legalizing it, that all goes away for the most part. I mean, there's always going to be somebody that robs a bank, but
Yeah.
banks aren't illegal. If they were, it would be happening a lot more.
Well, yeah, and you know, somebody could still come in and rob you for your weed, even if it were decriminalized.
But
The
still, you can go to
difference
the police
is,
now.
yeah, exactly. You can go to the police now. You have a recourse. It's not a, it's, you know,
Get your gun and go get your weed back.
Yeah, you could recover it from the cops. How crazy is that?
Yeah,
I
recovering
am
your
going to
stolen.
the police station to get my weed back. That is the future I want for America. Yes.
I want a
Absolutely.
future where the property rights of the Seventh Amendment are actually respected. That was Seventh Amendment, right? Property rights to Seventh Amendment.
I'm not super familiar with that one, actually.
You're a political major.
I-
Seventh Amendment is property rights.
I don't remember. Let me use the internet real quick to remember what the Seventh Amendment is. I lose track after we get to like number 5.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's one of those things. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. Is if you remove the criminal element by legalizing and taxing it and making it a respectable business, then bye-bye problems, bye-bye cartel. And hello, new American industry that provides dignified work for thousands and thousands of Americans.
There was also another broader point that I wanted to get to by bringing this topic up in this specific discussion, which also speaks to an amendment. I believe it was the 13th Amendment, the one that ended slavery.
Yeah. I remember. I actually have it memorized, actually.
Word. There is a small catch in there that you might also have memorized, where there is a legal form of slavery. Yes. And I feel like America hasn't given up on slavery in a certain way, and mandatory minimums, the war on drugs, those kinds of things, criminalizing common behaviors, and then forcing people to stay in jail for extended periods of time, even as violent crime is decreasing, is just all a side effect of that's the only slavery that's still legal, and we still haven't really been able to give it up.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about violent criminals than I am some 15-year-old kid who smokes a joint and happens to walk in school with one in his pocket that's going to jail for 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the guy who brought a gun that wanted to waste his classmates and then gets off with a psychiatric ward sentence.
100%.
Any final thoughts, guys?
I'm good. Jackie?
I'm good.
Well, we had a very good conversation, and I learned things at least. So thank you for that. There's things that I had.
Was I right about the amendment? More importantly,
yeah, it was talking about civil suits and right to trial by jury. So, I think
Sixth Amendment.
Hey, you know what? That is important too, because when an officer kills someone, no matter what they did, they are denied their trial by jury. They are denied their Seventh Amendment rights.
Extrajudicial killing. That's an extrajudicial killing, which is its own set of hell.
Yep.
Exactly. So now that we've discussed marijuana, and we've discussed marijuana policy, and you heard from our 2 content creators about their views on the Minneapolis protests, I imagine all of our viewers have a much better understanding of what Jackie Fox thinks and what Ian Freeze thinks. However, we're going to give them a chance to talk a bit more about their specific brand of politics, what exactly they believe, and kind of just talk about who they are and how that informs their politics. So we're going to transition a little bit to where Jackie and Ian are both going to talk about where they both fall in terms of like the political compass, and how they each represent a unique form of libertarianism as a concept, not just as a party, but as a concept. So we'll start with Jackie, and then we'll move to Ian. We'll keep the same order, I guess. So Jackie, describe for us your left libertarian type politics real quick.
Yes. So I think of myself as a democratic libertarian socialist. which describes me on three fronts. My relationship with power structures in terms of being a libertarian, my relationship for how people should have power, which is through the most democratic means that we have, and my relationship with economics and our economic destiny, which is better distributed through the social structure than tied up in a hierarchy, which also I think dovetails nicely into libertarianism as well. The libertarian ideals that I live by are a little bit different than what are usually ascribed to libertarianism. In at least in America, where it's usually associated with the party, as you noted, my ideals are usually under the blanket of anarchism, where I don't believe that people should live under hierarchies, or especially unjustified hierarchies. Um, because those hierarchies usually lead to kind of downstream violence where the people on the top can with impunity inflict violence on those below. I mean, in a number of my answers so far, I have come out against having multi-tiered systems where someone has more rights on top than they do on bottom. I don't think it works with the police. I don't believe it really works anywhere. It doesn't work with marijuana, where, you know, you having a lot of money gives you more rights to start your marijuana business than somebody on the bottom. And I would seek to basically remove those as much as possible and further democratize things. I mean, the way that I think that politics and the way that we interface with politics should move over time. I mean, currently I'm more supportive of the Green Party, but I think that eventually we need to move away from the idea of having representatives or having a representative government at all. I think we're moving into an era where we could have secure online referendum for a lot of the issues that face us, at least on the local level. If we did have to elect representatives, then they could be more along the lines of straw men, to where we, the voters, inform them of what we want and they act accordingly. And they are bound to act accordingly, instead of them promising us how they're going to act and then them doing whatever they want once they get in. I mean, there have been studies that show that they are far more likely to vote for an issue when the 1%, or when a majority of the 1% wants that issue, than when even 70, 80, 90% of America does. It doesn't change the likelihood of how likely they are to pass a certain legislation based on popular support. It has no effect on the system whatsoever. And in part because we have a two-party system, to where they only have to be slightly different from each other in a few fundamental ways that they can politicize and pump through the media, as Ian's article is pointing out. You know, they can make themselves seem worlds apart even when they agree on most everything. And most of the issues that we really care about, neither of them are going to represent us on, because we don't have any other option.
100%. As Jackie mentioned, and as I mentioned in the introduction, if you pull one thing out of this interview, it's detaching libertarianism as a concept from the Libertarian Party. Libertarianism encompasses a whole bunch of political beliefs, not just those espoused by the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party, which we'll talk about with Ian in a little bit, as well as the Green Party that Jackie talked about. Both of those are official political parties in North Carolina that you can have your voter registration changed to. Just as a quick description of both, to see if both of them kind of jump out at you as something you would be interested in. The Green Party that Jackie talked about, like he said, it generally falls on the left libertarian side of the political compass. Five ways to generally describe them. They describe policies of progressivism, civil libertarianism, eco-socialism, anti-capitalism, and green politics and environmental politics in general. So that's a general way to describe the Green Party. And if that really intrigues you, feel free to research more, head to our website, and follow the links to the Green Party's many different things in North Carolina. Ian's about to talk to you about the Libertarian Party as a party, which generally falls on the right libertarian side of the political compass, and generally espouses the concepts of libertarianism, much like the Green Party does, but also classical liberalism as an economic concept, as well as a very literal interpretation of individual liberty. So if Ian, if you could talk about the Libertarian Party and your politics in general, so that people can get a better idea of where you stand and where that compares and contrasts with the Libertarian Party in North Carolina.
Well, Libertarian Party, you basically covered all the bases. The only thing that's different from me is that I think that the civil union and the homosexual marriage thing is a little different from my view. I don't think the government has any business involved in marriage at all. I think it just should give partnership certificates and people will call it whatever they want on their own time. I don't think that the government has any business calling a marriage whatever people want to call it. I think they should issue a certificate and just say, here's a certificate. You two are joined at the hip now. Call it a marriage, call it a partnership, call it side piece. We don't care. We don't care what you call it. Just leave us out of it. It's caused enough headaches already.
So is the Libertarian Party against gay marriage?
No, they're all for it.
Okay.
Okay. The next thing
I get what you're saying.
Now, the next thing, that's just an unnecessary headache they're putting themselves through, is my point. That's causing a lot of people not to go for them that might otherwise go for them.
There's honestly a lot of support for
right.
that in the gay community. Like there's a lot of people in the LGBT that would agree with you that, you know, we don't necessarily want marriage. We just want to be treated equally.
Yeah.
But that we don't, there's a lot of people that don't want to jump into that system because they don't necessarily see that as the best way to go.
1 second. Then the other thing is the abortion debate. I'm pro-life. I was adopted. I have very strong feelings about that. And I think that abortion should be accessible for people whose lives are at risk, but adoption should always be the first and foremost option. But if a woman's life is at risk and she already has children that are quite young and need their mother, then by all means do what you have to do to make sure she's there to take care of the children that are actually outside of her. I don't want to say alive, but that's what many people believe. But I believe that the baby is actually alive at the moment of conception, to begin with, because even a single-celled organism of bacteria is alive. So the DNA from a man and a woman that has become a single cell, that is still alive. Even if it is a single cell, it's still alive. Speaking purely in scientific terms, a single cell, no matter how big or small, is still a living entity that has a life of its own. May not be sentient yet, but it's still alive. That's where those are the two things that get me on libertarianism right off the bat that have kind of pushed me away from that. They're giving themselves unnecessary headaches by making blanket statements like abortion on demand and gay marriage. If it wasn't for those two things, that would be a very easy decision for me to make. Now, my personal brand of libertarianism, I'm sorry, did I cut you off there at all?
No, I just have my thoughts for what you're going to say once you're done, so I'm just preparing for it.
I wasn't rude to you at all, was I, Jackie?
No, you're good.
Okay.
If anything, I jumped in on yours. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, basically, Ron Paul.
Oh, it disappeared. There it is.
Ron Paul and Matt Kibb. One of them is called "Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff," a libertarian manifesto. I'm sure your friend who got held at gunpoint would agree with that. And then the other one, Liberty Defined, 50 Essential Issues That Define Our Freedom. Basically, my entire philosophy is if you don't hurt them, they don't hurt you. You don't go near them and start problems. They won't try to finish your problems that you're trying to start. So basically, I think that according to my libertarian beliefs, the God who gave you life also gave you liberty at the same time, and it's the government's job to protect the rights that are already yours naturally. And I'll note that the Bill of Rights is called the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Privileges. Rights do not come from a human being. Privileges come from a human being. Rights come from God. Rights are yours naturally, that are part of the natural order of nature. So That is my primary concern. So I think that it's quite important to note that in many cases, the Constitution is more of the federal government is not allowed to do this. So it's more of a thou shalt not list for the federal government. So that way, most of the power will be relegated to the states. In fact, the reason the federal government isn't working correctly is because it's doing more than it was ever intended to do, when all it was actually intended to do was handle international affairs on our behalf. And everything else between states was supposed to be left to the states to handle on their own. So all it was supposed to do is collectively bargain for us and defend us if our national security was threatened or a trade deal was being organized between us and another nation. So that's a primary concern for me, is that the system isn't broken, it's being stretched too far and doing things it was never designed to do to begin with. They're trying to use a wrench as a hammer. A wrench was not designed to be used as a hammer.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and the Constitution to me is more of a boilerplate lease, because they signed it, they dated it, they wrote stuff down about how the system was going to work, and then they ratified it. That sounds more like a legal document than a living document to me. And the only way you change the document is by adding an amendment. And if we're saying it's a living document by way of you can change it by the adding of a constitutional amendment, then yeah, I'll completely agree with that all day. Add a constitutional amendment, change the document that way, no problem, go for it. But if you're going to say it's a living document open to interpretation, then what's somebody going to do when we're going to interpret the First Amendment saying that social media platforms aren't really what they meant when they said freedom of the press, because it's not the technology that is protected, it is the principle that is protected. It is the principle that is protected. So technically speaking, we're not just engaging in social media. When you started Fulcrum, you're also engaging in the right to free speech, the right to assembly, the right to associate, and the right to air grievances, and so on and so forth. About 4 of your freedoms in the First Amendment were already protected by the First Amendment. And by the way, in case somebody tries to screw with those, the second one is there to help you out.
So Jackie and Ian have both kind of described what their political philosophies are.
Yeah, sorry I went on a tangent there, but
no worries.
Yeah.
But you both have kind of described what you kind of believe, and you guys have both described 2 different versions of libertarianism as a concept. As we've said throughout this entire thing, if anything that Jackie or Ian talked about in their little descriptions of their personal philosophies and what they believe really resonate with you, please feel free to reach out to them, get to know them. They're both really fun people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having this interview. This interview and debate's a lot of fun because we're all a lot of fun to talk to. So if what they say really resonate with you, find them in the Fulcrum Politics Facebook groups, find them on their own personal channels, which will be linked in the description for this video, or somewhere future Jackie's going to put them. But yeah, the big thing I want everyone to take home from just this first introduction is that if this really resonates you, I hope this tells you that you're not alone. There is a tribe for you out there, where there are people that think like you, talk like you, and act like you, that you can find a political home in. Notice how both Jackie and Ian have a third party that they generally align with, but both have areas where they disagree with them. So just because there isn't currently a political party that aligns perfectly doesn't mean that there won't be one in the future, and it doesn't mean that there's not one that's close. Both Jackie and Ian have made certain decisions where maybe they sacrifice 1 or 2 policies in order to find a party where they can maximize getting the rest of their ideas across. For Jackie, it's the Green Party, and for Ian, it's the Libertarian Party. But as they both talked about, there's certain things they disagree with, and that's perfectly okay. Everyone's unique, and finding that tribe for each of us is really what Fulcrum Politics is all about. So as they talked about differences and things that they agreed with and disagreed with, let's compare and contrast their two different ways that libertarianism is part of their political philosophy. So, as both of you guys were describing what you guys are talking about, what sort of things did you hear from the other that you really agreed with as an expression of libertarianism?
I really like the pursuit of personal liberty. I feel like there's a few places that libertarianism kind of takes it in a weird direction. I mean, like right libertarianism takes it, or the Libertarian Party takes it in a weird direction. I personally can't get behind the idea of classical liberalism necessarily. I think that that's just kind of ceding power to a different type of power structure. I mean, again, I'm against hierarchies and power structures that take power away from the individual by creating a tiered system. And I feel like classical liberalism is a little bit too laissez-faire in a lot of ways. Um, that's why I like more worker democratic systems or just flat hierarchies in general. And I think that that's kind of a, I don't know, kind of an internal contradiction that always kind of gets me. Um, but yeah.
What was one thing that Jackie talked about that you really identified, Ian, when he was describing his own political philosophies that really resonated with you?
I agreed with most of what he had to say, but I'm more of a fan of a hierarchy by way of merit, a meritocracy, where the intelligent, the best in their field, the most qualified are allowed to succeed, and they are carried as far as their merits will allow them to go. No one is stopping you from reaching your full potential. You are not going to be discriminated based on your race, age, gender, or sexual orientation.
I don't disagree with that. I disagree with the way that people usually interpret that or apply it.
The only hierarchy I think we should recognize in this country is the hierarchy of the merits of an individual, where if somebody is smart, capable, and willing to work hard, then we give them every possible chance to fulfill their ambitions, regardless of their race, age, gender, or sexual orientation, or where they're from, or anything like that. That is the only hierarchy I think we should recognize in this country. And that would be a hierarchy because those people will become leaders and some people who are not as smart will become followers. But if they are truly good at what they do and are smart and intelligent, and people have the right to choose who they will and will not follow, if somebody is bad but they are still smart and know what they are doing, they may not be followed. So I still think that that will be the best system out there.
I mean, I do actually agree with that. I just disagree with the way that that tends to be portrayed and kind of put across, especially in kind of the neoliberal model that we have now and the way that we tend to see everything through that.
That's
Like,
not my intention. My intention
well,
is
well,
much more
no, I
wholesome
mean,
than that.
yeah, when you like said it out the way that you mean it, I ended it resonated a lot with me and I understood it a lot more
Yeah.
than I typically feel like I do from most people who describe themselves as libertarian, or most people who say the first couple of words that you did in that paragraph and don't go on to define it exactly the way that you do.
I call it more compassionate conservatism. I call it a compassionate form of conservatism where people are willing to help those who are willing to help themselves, which
the,
is not something that I think is necessarily a bad thing. But I still think God calls us to help those who aren't helping themselves at the same time. But I do think that we need to be helping others who are helping themselves so they can help others who aren't helping themselves.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It reminds me of something that a friend and I were talking about with the way that a socialist model would actually work in terms of like worker owned production the way that a business would actually operate, it would still have the dynamic that you're describing, because it wouldn't just be, there wouldn't be no leaders within that, but the leaders would be more elected, and you would probably elect the person who is good at the job or good at leading. The natural work, the natural leader would arise through their merit, and that's not really the way that it works right now. So I think that that ideal kind of fits what you're talking about. I think there's other ways to come to that. That's just the way that I would prefer to get there.
Respectfully, Jackie, if I may, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but do you mind if I just ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I would argue that we already elect our business leaders by choosing which companies to frequent and which companies we choose to work for, and deciding which company we choose to buy from and which businesses we choose to frequent. I'd argue that our dollars are a form of voting on which company and business succeeds.
I have heard that argument so many times, and
I mean,
the reason that I disagree with it is that people,
you see the logic behind that, though, right?
I can see the basic logic behind that. It does kind of work.
I mean,
it works in an ideal place. If everyone made $50,000 a year and had the perfect ability to, like, not only that, they make $50,000 a year and they only work 20 hours a week. So they have enough time to do the research into every company that they shop from, to make sure that they fully fit their ideal set, and they have enough money to shop with the company that they end up finding, then you could really vote with your dollar. That is not the situation that we live in. We live in a highly unequal society where a lot of people can only afford to shop at certain places. We have to make the, you know, when you're talking about like why the two-party system is bad because you're always voting for the lesser of two evils, that's kind of how poor people have to deal with the companies that they choose to support with their dollar. They have to pick, you know, do I go for this option, which is a little bit more expensive, but still probably a completely horrible company? Or do I go for the absolute worst company that also has the absolute lowest prices, but probably employs a lot of slave labor in a third world country and then has it exported across the ocean, wasting a lot of diesel, pumping a lot of carbon into the atmosphere? But I don't really have enough money to actually support the company that I wish I could. That's the major failure of that. And the other thing about that is, like, the way that people end up getting power. Donald Trump is a perfect example of this. To a certain degree, they're born with more opportunity than the rest of us, and then it becomes a matter of whether or not they can capitalize on that head start. You know, it would be like if you and I
just easily blown it, though.
Ian,
oh, he could have.
Make sure you let Jackie finish. All right, don't try not to interrupt him. Okay.
Sorry about that.
He absolutely could have. You know, if we went into a game of Monopoly where you had all the big bills and I had the stack of ones, I could still win by playing really well. That is entirely possible. But 99 times out of 100, that just wouldn't happen. Like, you already have so much of a leg up on me from, you know, not only the money that you started out with, but the connections, the family connections, which can often be worth a lot more even than the money. And all sorts of privileges that come with that. It's our system, the way it is, just really isn't based on merit, and just the idea of generational wealth. All of those sorts of things really play into that in a way that doesn't encourage a level playing field even from the beginning. But I think if a lot of those things were removed and we just had 30 workers that controlled the business that they worked for and kind of all came together to say, how do we make this work the best? Who can organize us the best, and chose the person who actually showed the merit, showed that they could do the job. That would be a far better way than the person who happens to own the building or happens to be able to shell out enough money to buy the building, or to the investor that buys the company, or the Elon Musk of the world.
Can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so my main concern about what you just said is that there was a woman named C.J. Walker. She was the first freeborn in her family, She was married at about the age of 14 to 16,
Hmm.
widowed with child when she was in her late teens, early 20s. And as an African American woman living in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's already a headache, being a single mom, as you can probably imagine.
Absolutely.
Okay. She became the first millionaires in this country by making a line of soaps, shampoos, and cleaning products for women. So she became a millionaires and was able to afford anything she darn well pleased because she worked hard. And that was before women even had voting rights.
Yeah.
So I do not think that this is a country that uh, is that bad off when it comes to affording people opportunities if they're willing to try hard.
I mean, like I said with the Monopoly example, it's certainly possible that I could try really hard and have a really good strategy and a lot of lucky breaks and beat you with just the ones when you have the tens, twenties, hundreds, and $500 bills. It's possible, but and I'm sure that like if you looked, if you you might have a list of these people that you could name off, but there have been billions of Americans to live and die since that woman's story was told. And many of them did not have that same experience. And many of them worked very hard, every bit as hard as she had or harder, and did not have that same experience. I would prefer that it were more based on merit, that we could create more women like that. But I mean, the way the system works, it doesn't end up that way. I mean, you see this especially like this is really accelerated since 2000, since the 1990s especially. But like the tech bubble is such a perfect example of this because there's so many big tech companies that just get so big that they start to eat up all of the other companies. One example that I threw out in a recent video over on my channel was the example of Amazon when they got into a war with diapers.com. Diapers.com was doing really well. Like they were doing amazing in selling diapers. That was their niche. They were doing a great job. And Amazon wanted to buy them. And they didn't want to sell. They didn't want to sell for the price that Amazon wanted. They valued their company much higher than that. So Amazon started offering all mothers free Prime for like 6 months and then they made their own line of diapers. They dropped their prices to the point where they were hemorrhaging millions and hundreds of millions of dollars like a week, selling these so far below cost just to screw over diapers.com. They came back about a month or so later after doing that for a while, and they brought them back to the negotiating table, and they were able to buy their company at the price that they had demanded. There are so many dirty tactics that you can do just from having a monopolistic force in the way that our economic system runs right now. There's so many ways to run struggling small businesses out, out of their ability to compete. And on top of that, as a person who has had a lot of friends try to start small businesses, I've tried to start many small businesses myself. The thing that screws with us the most is that most of our peers don't have disposable income. And, we're not generally, we generally have ideas. We have new things that we're trying to get out there, new ideas that we're trying to push. And by nature of that, they're not essential. So when people have to decide between having money for food or rent and this cool new idea that their friend has that they want to support, they don't choose us. They might love us, but they can't choose us because they've got to keep, even their kids fed. Maybe it's, maybe if it weren't for that, they would make the sacrifice and eat rice and beans, but you can't necessarily make that decision when you have children. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons why an unequal economic system, or one that's almost designed to be hierarchical and unequal in that way, discourages small business generation. And I think that we need to be more wary of that. And I think that you are to a certain level conscious of that, but and again, in the way that you described that earlier, I realize that you are more conscious of that than more of the people that I see as right libertarians. But I think I'm a lot more conscious of that. You know, we're in flux on the bottom of that spectrum compared to where our parties usually sit. But
We're all unique
did you say bro unique? What was that?
because we're all very unique
Oh,
individuals.
okay.
So we've all got unique beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But any thoughts in response, Ian?
No, other than the fact that the system is the best one we have at the moment, and that for as long as people have ever lived, people have always rejected socialism.
It's only been available as a philosophy for like 100 years. I mean, people said that
Socialism,
people said that about capitalism at a certain point in time. They said, oh no. People said that about democracy. People said that about republics at certain points in time.
I think that socialism will never ever work because people's basic instinct is more in line with capitalism than with socialism.
Well,
I
People's
mean,
I definitely think the debate on socialism versus capitalism will definitely be another interview topic we could have in the future. Because that
I'm not saying that you're wrong.
2, 3, 4 hours, I'm sure, right?
oh yeah, I will dig my heels in on that one for sure. Like there have been a number of things that have been brought up in here that I'm like, I could push back on that, but I guess I'm not. But you start talking about socialism not working or not being aligned with human ideals either. I will dig in on that one.
So I definitely think that can be a preview for our next topic or a topic in the future where the two of you may debate capitalism versus socialism as competing economic philosophies. But like I said, that could take 3, 4 hours. So
Yeah.
I think
I'm sure it could.
Yes.
Very
possible. So I
possible.
think we're probably after Jackie does his edits, I imagine we're probably be pushing an hour for all of this. But all you viewers at home, I'm sure you've heard a lot of things that you agree and disagree with. Like we've said throughout this entire video, if certain things that Jackie and Ian talk about really resonate with you, reach out to them, learn more about the parties they talk about, learn more about the positions they talk about, and kind of just continue to understand that you're not alone out there. There are people out there that think like you do, that want to work with you and really make some of these different parties, these 18 different third parties in North Carolina that are all trying to become successful. There's one out there for you, I promise. And if there isn't, all of us working together maybe can help you build that kind of party. So this entire video series is all about kind of just exposing what people believe and talking about it, talking about nuances, and really talking about what opportunities are out there for politics outside of the two-party system. So do you guys have any final thoughts about anything we've talked about tonight? Anything you want to leave for our viewers at home or plug the things that you're working on?
Well, in the same way that I believe that our small businesses do not have the opportunity to thrive as they should because of monopolistic powers at the top of a hierarchy, we have a similar problem with the two-party system and those, what would you say, it was 18 different third parties that are trying to compete in this thing?
Yeah, 3 official, which is the Libertarians, Greens, and Constitution Party, and then 15 other right now they're just organizations because they're not official parties, but 15 other organizations that have active signature petitions with the state of North Carolina. So 18 total options in the future.
That sounds like a hierarchy we need to get rid of so that so many people don't have to be politically homeless.
Yes.
I'm Jackie Fox, and I'm all for ending political homelessness.
Yes. That should be our tagline for everything.
Ending political homelessness.
Ending political homelessness. Yes. Any final thoughts, Ian, and anything that you want to plug and talk about?
Okay, so I'm involved with this charity that my church does to raise money so the less fortunate children can get Christmas gifts. I will be sending a link out to Mr. Fox and also to Mr. Smith, and then they will be putting it up, I I believe you both agree to that, correct?
It's going to be in the description.
At the very least, yes, it's going to be in the description down below, as all the popular YouTubers say. Check the description down below.
Yeah.
Or as all the cool YouTubers say, in the doobly-doo.
In the doobly-doo.
So,
yeah, I figured you'd like that word, Nick.
Yeah. The whole point is to make sure that these kids get gifts this Christmas season. And I know it's a little soon, but I wanted to give people opportunities to donate a little bit once a month or once a week, several times before the actual big day gets here. And then we can maybe help out more than just 4 or 5 kids this year. So
Christmas may be out of season, but compassion is always in season.
Absolutely. $50 per child will get them a coat, some gloves, a scarf, and some toys. But also, depending on what the kid asks for, sometimes they'll just ask for a basketball, but we'll also try to get them an air pump as well. That'll be about $40. So usually the target is about $40 to $50 per child. So $40 to $50 per child, and you give them a Christmas.
Sounds like a great deal to me.
Yeah. You can't put a price tag on a child's smile.
Yeah, can't put a price tag on compassion. You're 100% right. Compassion and gratitude are priceless treasures that we as humans get to experience every day.
Absolutely.
So with that, our first session of, I guess, the Balanced Perspectives, what would we call it? The Balanced Perspectives interview, or the Balanced Perspective?
We could try to make vodcast a word.
Podcast, okay.
How it's 2020.
Say again?
How it's 2020. Fulcrum 2020.
Well, I'm thinking about this specific video series, I guess. If this ends up becoming a video series, which I hope it does, because that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Because you see how 2020 is like each thing is given fair shake, right?
Yep, it is. And you can do like 20/20, so you're also making a joke on eyesight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you to our 2 content creators that joined us on this video series for our first video. Look forward to future articles by Jackie Fox and Ian Freeze at the Balanced Perspectives blog page on fulcrumpolitics.org, and continue reading their stuff and looking forward to more videos in the future, including a potential video as of tonight on the merits of socialism versus capitalism, which I'm sure will be entertaining for everybody and totally will not devolve into insults and name calling. I'm Nick Smith with Fulcrum Politics, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Look forward to further content by Jackie Fox and Ian Freeze, including this upcoming Friday, June 5th, where they both will be talking about what they would do if they were a police chief, both in response to the Minneapolis protests, but also just in general, talking about police reform, criminal justice reform, and a few other things. So look forward to both of them answering the question, what would Sheriff Taylor do? This is Nick Smith of Fulcrum Politics. Thank you all for coming out, and we'll see you next time.